Hey guys, what's up? It's Sisn't here. Now, I love leather, and this should come as no surprise to anyone who knows me or the channel or, well, from looking at this rack of leatherworking tools behind me. But I'm also mindful of the shortcomings of the materials that I use. So, a little hobby of mine, a pastime if you will, every so often I will look at what kind of plant-based alternatives there are to leather available in the market. I'm not interested in vegan leathers that are plastic that is attached to an interfacing material, because not only are those a worse material, they're worse for the environment. So I shan't be going into that. And a lot of the times I'll approach a business that sells plant-based leather products and ask them, hey, who's your supplier? Where do you get this stuff from? And a lot of the time, understandably, they will tell me, go away, we're not telling you who our supplier is because we're a business and we're trying to make money by selling the things that our supplier gives us at a market. All of this is understandable and is the way that business works, and is a conversation for another time about why I don't like it. In late 2020 though, I reached out to a company called Verdant. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And as luck would have it, I managed to get in touch with the company owner, who for the sake of their own privacy shall remain nameless, but thank you very much for all of the correspondence we had. That segues me nicely into the fact that this video is not sponsored by Verdant, but Verdant were extraordinarily accommodating. They couldn't give me their suppliers, but what they did give me was a sample range. Here we have 3 different kinds of plant-based leather, and what I'm going to be doing is investigating these leathers. I want to see how suitable each of these is as a replacement or an alternative to the veg tan leather that I use in almost every project that I make. So there are a few things that I'm chiefly concerned about when I'm talking about the ability of this leather to be a good facsimile. And those things are, in no particular order, how it glues, how it stitches, how the edges finish, and perhaps most importantly, how it tools and carves. And I will just cap off this overlong intro by pointing out that I'm doing this intro before the bulk of the video, which isn't normally the way that I roll. Generally, I'll film the introduction afterwards so I know the important stuff that I ought to say to the camera. But in the interests of you guys coming along on this journey with me, won't you come along on this journey with me while we discover together how all of this is going to turn out? I have no idea, so let's get into it. Now then, the 3 sample pieces. So a lot of plant-based leathers, the fibers are bound and treated and essentially printed in these huge sheets. So these are just a tiny section of plant-based leather that would come in a gargantuan sheet. Let's start with this darkest one. It has a slightly glossy finish that you can see there. Puts me a little bit in mind of the chrome tan leather skirt that I have. Actually, just for sake of comparison, this is an old leather skirt that I picked up at an op shop, and you can see actually it's goddamn near identical. Not only the sheen, but the color and the finish. The reverse side is quite fluffy, should take glue very well, and the edges on this one are untreated. So just because I don't know what plant these are made of, what the process is, or how they're different, I'm going to number these. So for the sake of comparison, we're going to call this one number 1, and it will henceforth be referred to as such. Next cab off the ranks, we'll take this very shiny piece. That's not just the camera, this is really catching the light, and this one of all of them feels the most plasticky. The back of it is very suede-like, though if I saw this I wouldn't immediately be able to tell that this isn't an animal-based leather from the back, but you know, we'll see how she cuts and stitches, and we're going to call this one number 2. And third and finally, the one that was cut with pinking shears for some reason. This, I think, has the most pronounced texture of all of them. This is a really lovely look. It does make me wonder how long it would hold this look. And the back of this one is not quite as fuzzy. I can just about see the weave of the interfacing material on the back of this one, and that makes me wonder how well the rear of this is going to take glue, and it makes me wonder how firmly the front of this is attached to that interfacing. So we're going to call this one number 3. And last but not least, by way of comparison, I am going to be using a thin piece of goat hide. So we'll cut a piece off of this. Now, of course, it would be super easy to just get a big 4mm thick piece of cowhide that's going to take any kind of tooling, carving, and stamping exceptionally well, and by that metric, fail all of these plant-based leathers. But I'm still going to be comparing like for like. These ones are quite thin, so I'm going to use this very thin bit of goat hide. So let's get into some cutting and stitching, and we'll see what kind of edge we can work up on all of these leathers. I'd just like everyone to know that I fucking called it. So you can see here that before I managed to spread the glue, it's actually soaked into the interfacing material. I'm gonna have to really slather my contact adhesive onto this to get it to stick. And you will have noticed that this pattern didn't happen on piece 1 and piece 2 because they didn't have the same kind of fabric interfacing behind them. So I'll be interested to see if I can get this one to glue at all, but moving on. And now we wait for the glue to dry. Okay, so what you just saw was actually a slight problem. This is my 4mm pricking iron, and that means that if I want to mark a line 4mm in from the edge, what I normally would do is just take one of the tines and run it down the edge. So you can see here that as the line is being pushed in, it's sort of springing back almost immediately. And just to give a point of reference, here is some goat hide. So when I score up the edge here, you can see that that's a very clear impression that isn't going anywhere. So the fact that plant-based leather number 1 doesn't really hold an imprint when it's dry is making me a little bit nervous about how well it's going to hold an imprint when it's wet. But we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Just something that I wanted to point out along the way. Now then, I'm going to be using a contrasting thread for a couple of reasons. 1, so that you can see how the thread goes through these stitch holes, and 2, because I've got a bunch of white thread that I need to use up, so might as well use it on this. And I will have a saddle stitching tutorial forthcoming for anyone who is interested to have me talk you through it. But TLDR, we put a needle on either end of a piece of thread. We're going to find the halfway point. Now this is extraordinarily supple, and then I'm just going to work my way backwards. So I think that what's happening here, and I'm gonna leave those first few stitches in there. It's ugly as sin, but I want you all to see it. Here is how a saddle stitch should work. As I pull on both threads simultaneously, the direction that I am pulling them is going to determine where in my chisel hole the thread is going to wind up. You can see that as I do it slowly, it's behaving itself. Let's bring you in a bit. So this is how it's supposed to look with these diamond-shaped chisel holes. I want the threads to be running from the top of one to the bottom of the next, down in this nice aesthetically pleasing pattern. Down at this end, it's ugly. It's ugly as all hell because they are shifting in the chisel hole when I pull on the thread too hard. So normally I pull on the threads quite hard, and I'm guessing that the internal friction in the stitching hole on this plant-based leather is lower, and as such the thread is just sort of slipping over itself. But if I take it slowly, it goes all right. I'll finish up here and then we'll move on to piece number 2. So you can see all down here, it looks like it's stuck together. As I'm pulling these threads, they're pulling each side of this further and further apart. And the glue has just given way under the strain. The fabric interfacing just isn't gluing the way that leather glues, because it's not leather, it's fabric. So yeah, Grant, it's fabric, it's not leather. It is totally unreasonable for me to expect this to behave the same way as leather. So the analog for this number 3 plant-based leather is not going to realistically ever be actual leather. The analog for this is going to be like composite upholstery leather, which is a material, you know, it's... No, I can't think of anything nice to say about composite leather, I'm sorry, but we'll keep plugging away with this and see how it continues to stitch. So a couple of things now that you can see that we are a few stitches in with the goat hide. The first is that you can hopefully see that I'm able to pull on this fairly tight and we're not having any skipping of the stitches along here. And the second thing is that all of these holes are remaining very, very wide open compared to the plant-based leathers. They seem like they're very quick to return to their original shape, and in that manner they're quite unlike veg tan. I will admit that stitching this goat hide is a lot more familiar to me. This is what I'm used to. Whereas if I'd spent all of this time working purely in plant-based leathers and you'd shown me this goat hide, I would be like, why do I have to be so rough when I'm pulling the thread? Why are these holes so wide open? Why does it get marked if I just push my fingernail into it? That mark's going to be permanent. These are just things that I have become used to with the material. They're not necessarily a good or a bad thing. Now that all of our pieces are nicely stitched together, the next thing that I want to test is going to be how much of an edge we can get onto these. You can see here, it's already starting to darken, it's already starting to go smooth, it's already starting to become a little bit glossy, as compared to down here where it is still gross and stringy and a little bit fuzzy. Can you even tell which side has been burnished? It was this side. So that was how all 4 of these took an edge and responded to edge treatment. So the next thing that we're going to do is see how well they cope with tooling and stamping, which I don't have high hopes for, so fingers crossed. see that with the goat leather, this is very raised, very textured. This is how stamped leather should look. We shall move up in number. So here we have piece number 3. And I do have to say, whoever the manufacturers of this leather are, they've done a phenomenal job with the texturing and making it behave like chrome tan does. But this is a veg tan comparison, so I'm going to continue to be really needlessly mean. You've heard of watching paint dry, but now, with the wonders of YouTube, we can watch leather absorb moisture. Look at it go. Isn't that magnificent? So you can see there's very slightly textured. Yep, surface number 3 has not taken the tooling at all. So the original tool has left a slight indentation that you can kind of barely see. There's no texture there, it's not really raised at all. You can kind of see the texture in the light. So better than the previous one, but still not very good. You can see here again, I'm catching it with the edge of the light and there's a tiny bit of texture there, like a tiny bit. I can't really even feel it with my finger. So yeah, unfortunately, not much texture given to this one either. Well, what to say by way of conclusion. Again, I didn't go into this one totally free from bias. I did expect that the goat leather would perform better, certainly with being tooled or stamped, having that pattern put onto it. That being said, I was pretty impressed with some of the plant-based leather. It's not fair to compare it directly to veg tan goat hide because that's not what it's attempting to replicate. It's attempting to replicate something chrome tan. So if your project is something that you would use chrome tan leather for, like such as a little coin purse or some such as that, then these plant-based leathers will pretty much excel at that. I feel like I wasn't prepared for how good the texture on some of them were, especially my problem child number 3. For all of the frustrations with the interfacing lining and the leathercraft cement not working and the stitching being annoying and the edge not taking whatsoever, the texture on that thing is amazing. If your project requires you to have large sheets of leather, say for sake of example, a leather jerkin, something like this would be a really good application for some of these plant-based leathers. The reason for that, I've used veg tan goat hide for this, and this is something that doesn't require any edging because it's French seamed in the middle. Look, people who sew fabric instead of leather, I'm so sorry, French seam means something completely different, and no, I don't have time to go into it. So there's no actual need for edge treatment on a garment like this. This would have been a decent project to use plant-based leathers on. And of course, these are all sample swatches that I got, so I don't have the ability to purchase large sheets of them even if I had wanted to. All of that being said, thank you so much once again to Verdant, one, for supplying me with all of this stuff to look at and to review and to compare to animal-based leathers, and also for being so patient with me while I did put this video out. And again, not a sponsored video. They did send me this stuff free of charge, but if this was sponsored and I'm being paid for it, they'd be super upset with how long I took to push this fucking content out. So here we are. Also, they probably wouldn't let me casually drop an F-bomb like that. So what's all of this to say? Look, I'm looking for ways that I can reduce the amount of animal that I can consume. If that's you and you're looking for plant-based leathers getting there. You know, if you want to make garments, if you want to use chrome tan stuff, if you want to upholster furniture, dude, plant-based leather's there already. If you're a saddler and you're specifically looking for a plant-based leather as a veg tan alternative, sadly the ones that I've looked at today are not there. This is by no means a comprehensive list of all of the plant-based leathers that are out there, and I would love eternally to test more of them. So if you supply or you know of a supply of plant-based leather, please reach out to me just in the comments or whatever. I would love to get a hold of more of this stuff and test it because I'm really excited to see the direction that all of this stuff is going. All of that being said, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope that it was as interesting to you as it was to me. I found it very fascinating what these different leathers can and cannot do compared to an animal-based leather. At any rate, that's all that I've got for you, so you guys take it easy and I'll catch you later.